We live in a time that I think people need to be stronger and move slower and be more tolerant. When people have this idea of tough or being a badass, it's like, I don't think they understand that that's actually really connected to being the most loving, the most tolerant, but also not being a victim or a crybaby about things. It's like, show up, lift up your neighbor, be there for your family, take care of yourself. And there's so many lessons ahead, might as well embrace them.
You're listening to the Born Primitive Podcast.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Born Primitive Podcast. How we doing, Tony?
Morning, Bear.
We got a rare afternoon recording today. You're catching me right after a little 5x5 at the gym. I snuck off on my lunch break, so this could backfire. The pre-workout is still pumping. Heart rate's at like 130. No, it's not that bad. But really excited for today's guest. Gabby Reece, and I want to read her bio really quick that we wrote. You might know her as a world-class athlete, volleyball legend, fitness innovator, and entrepreneur. But beyond all that, she's a dedicated mother, mentor, and advocate for health and personal growth. From dominating the sand courts to redefining wellness with her work in fitness and mindset coaching, Gabby has spent her life pushing boundaries, not just for herself, but for those around her. And at the heart of it all is family. As a mother, she brings the same strength, discipline, and wisdom to raising her kids as she does her career. So we are really excited for today's guest. So Gabby, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Bear. I always think it's funny when you put in a capsule like about parenting, like somehow it's a fixed thing that somebody actually figures out. So hopefully people know that like for everyone else is pretty messy for me too.
Oh yeah. Well, I think, Tony and I are in that boat. We're fairly new fathers, and it absolutely is, you do your best and you figure it out. And I think it can be a little helpless at times because you think there's some perfect manual for this, but of course there isn't. So I think the guests will appreciate that. And obviously with you, Gabby, like there's so many ways we can go with this conversation. And since we only have like an hour, Tony and I were talking about, where we might guide this. But I think for you, obviously an accomplished athlete, accomplished entrepreneur, a leader in your space, best-selling author, you got the Gabby Reece Show. And you're obviously a person of family, a mother, all that. So I guess we'll let you guide this one. What is most relevant for Gabby Reece right now in her life?
Well, it's interesting. It's like everything in life, right? There's phases and chapters. And so, for example, my youngest daughter is a senior in high school. I have 3 daughters. So in this, once your kids turn sort of 15, 16, they come home for clean clothes, money, and food pretty much. And so I started kind of putting my foot a little more on the gas as far as work, probably about a year ago, where maybe for literally almost the 20 years prior to that, it was, okay, family and the relationship first as far as like real man hours, and then trying to keep this, our side things going. And 10 years ago, we started 2 different businesses. So I think for me, where I am right now, it's focused on staying as healthy as I possibly can, which has been an ongoing theme that's pretty consistent. Making sure that there's a kind of thriving and peaceful environment in my house and in my partnership. And being here for my children, but also now I'm having the opportunity to kind of redirect more energy back into my own work, which what the calling is, and it really hasn't been different, is to try to figure out ways we can get for people to decide how it's going to work for them to be healthier, and all the million ways that you can say the same thing over and over.
Gabby, as you reflect on the, say, 20 years as a mother, did you enter that season with kind of a smooth transition, or did that take a large shift in gears for you to be able to go from the Gabby Reece of, say, 21 years ago to then when your whole life changed? Was that a natural transition? And then talk about some of the major, and I'm sure there's with kids, I have 3 under 3 right now. Every 2 months is like a ever turning season. So talk to us about some highs and lows throughout that 20 years that come to mind.
I think there's so many universal themes for people when they enter into these situations and they think they're the only one. And what I've seen the patterns over and over is there's sort of all these these transitions that we make. So earlier in my career was really about me, about playing ball at first in college, then as a professional, and like trying to accrue this idea of success and taking advantage of opportunity and kind of all those things. And it was always a little bit more me centric, which I think you need to kind of do at that time in your life. And then I met my husband when I was 25. So I already started sort of considering another person, which in my mind now seems quite young. But you can't help when you meet someone that's worth, learning to dance with. And so I think I then started to soften the idea of just me, and I was always in survival mode. I didn't always live with my parents from age 2 to 7. So I had a hypervigilance that was like very much, interested in security, work, all these things. So then I would say that Laird and I had to go through some obstacles as a couple, both not having, examples in our house on, well, what does it look like? What does confrontation look like? What does it look like when one partner's just, work is killing it and one isn't? And just kind of all those things. So we sort of went through some things. And then I didn't have my first biological daughter. Laird came with a very small daughter, and her mother is always been the primary parent, and we've been there on the side. And then after we went through some things, we were together for about 8 years. Then we had our first biological daughter, and then another one after that. And I think that second daughter really add the transition of, okay, how can I stay myself as a person, as a moving athlete, as a woman, as all these things, and serve these people in my family? So that transition, I think I was realistic about it. I used to joke that I waited to have our second daughter, and I always treated it like I was going to be alone. This way I would be prepared and never upset about anything. And of course, Laird has shown up in a big way, but I approached it in a pretty brutal attitude of, well, what if Laird doesn't help? I'm not going to get stuck. So I think I always navigated, and I think that comes from athletics, which is like, look at all of the scenarios. So the transitions weren't easy, but I didn't get sidelined by them.
Well, I think, something that I wrestle with as a father, my daughter just turned 4 yesterday. So it's a fun age. Like at 3, I think was rough, not rough, but I think it was harder than 2. And now it's starting to get really fun. And, she's independent and, can get dressed and stuff. So there's little wins there that you're like, all right, one less thing I got to worry about. But what I struggle with, not struggle with, but what is a challenge is, for so many years, I was all in on the business. And then, when I was active duty military, it was that as well. And now when you have to have balance, you almost feel like when you're doing one, you're kind of like cheating on the other one, right? Like if I'm at home and it's 5 o'clock, I feel like, man, the old me would have been like just catching my stride, doing emails and stuff, and, be working until, 11, 12 o'clock at night. And then, vice versa. When I'm at Born Primitive, if I have to take a work trip, I think, man, I should be home. So I continue to wrestle with that. So I wonder, have you faced similar challenges? And I guess, what are your takeaways? It sounds like you've had, many years to navigate that impossible balance that you'll never truly strike. But I didn't know if you had any insights of ways you've been able to just kind of have acceptance on what that looks like for you.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is every family does it different, right? So I think it's first understanding. I always joke, what are you going to be comfortable apologizing for? So you really kind of setting up your own understanding of this long story that you're in, which is called raising children, and be like, what am I going to be okay if I need to apologize? So if someone said, for example, and I do think moms and dads are different. I think moms have this weird parental guilt no matter what you're doing. And so what I would say is this: instead of the idea of balance, looking at life as a flywheel, and sort of saying also, not only are you providing for your family and you're trying to be there for your family with time as well, but it's understanding they're watching your modeling. So they're seeing you as a working person, as a husband, as a dad, as a friend, as a person who has interests and passions. So understanding that even when you're at work and providing for your family, you're also modeling to your children and showing them what it looks like to show up in your life. And instead of looking at it as buckets, you often see people talk about balance as buckets. I have 3 chips in my personal and my work and all this. I look at it as a flywheel. And it's the idea of, hey, if my work is something I'm passionate about, I feed that into my relationship. And if my relationship is dynamic and sort of vibrant and growing, that also gets into the house and into how we parent and into our children. And we also show them what it looks like to do all the things that you have to do. So I think the minute we feel guilt or pulled, we understand that's really natural. And then say, yes, but what is it that I'm doing? And is it feeding into that flywheel? And if it is, going, hey, this is life. And you know, you never get it right, but I think that that's an easier way to look at it. Because somebody said to me once, Byron Katie, she said 2 things we could do for our children that's really powerful. Listen to them without fixing their problems, and be as happy. And when I say that, it could be, you know, joyful, so they know what it looks like. And I think there's something really true about that.
Over your time as a mother, something my wife and I, and you laughed when I said it, like we are in the trenches
Oh
right
my
now
God.
with
I would have been divorced.
but what we had a conversation about the other day is kind of joy in play. And I know that's something I actually heard you and Laird do a podcast on it. And I'm a huge, Paul Check has been a huge mentor of mine, and he talks about play all the time. And I loved your conversation because it was actually following her and I having almost the exact discussion of like, okay, we were both Division I athletes. So like giving each other the space to work out, we're going to do that. Like that's a non-negotiable that like, hey, I'll take the 3 kids for 45 minutes, go do something, go move your body. But as we assessed kind of like the 4 doctors or like even just the holistic view on like where we're at, we realized we're giving ourselves 0 time for just playing or like joy. And for me, and her, that looks different. Like, I think there's definitely some value alignment there, but we realize like we need to do a better job of finding ways to incorporate that. And that's going to be an ongoing discussion as to where that fits, because right now it's like there isn't a minute in the day that isn't accounted for. But do you have any advice over your time? And I'd love maybe Laird as well as to ways you were able to incorporate that, because it is such a vital part of what you said of like being happy for your kids, not just it being a job where you're doing all that, you're checking all the boxes, you're feeding them good food, they're exercising, they're getting outside, they're like, but then you, at the end of the day, you're like, we haven't spent 5 minutes in a day to really just reflect and be able to have just like unabated joy within a day. So any advice there?
Well, I think first of all, you have to give yourself a lot of grace, because if you're talking about 3 kids under the age of 3, that's no joke, right? So it's like anything, you have to assess what it is that you're actually navigating, and then saying the fact that everyone is like safe, fed, and clean, that's a big win. And so I think it's first being people really understanding, where am I at? What are we navigating? And so rather than putting pressure in like one more thing that we're not getting done, how about this idea? What about it becomes a smaller notion? It doesn't become monumental. It's this idea of the small moments, like, you walk by your wife and, it's sort of like one is playful with the other, or there's these, even, you're walking a kid into a bathtub and then, there's an opportunity, maybe you're danced to the bathtub. I think sometimes we think of play as this sort of really monumental thing, instead of the spirit of playfulness, which you can bake into throughout your day, in sort of small ways and big ways that brings levity and kind of the playful spirit into the house. Because when you have 3 kids under 3, this idea of scheduling play is going to be tricky, but being playful and even in the shit show that is 3 kids under 3 is, even with chaos, kind of even with you and your wife, being like having fun with how crazy it can be.
What a powerful way to frame it. And it's so true, because therein lies like the kind of the duty element of it, is that if you wear that mask for too long, it starts to get heavy, meaning like you lose the lightness of the relationship that maybe you had prior to having kids. And it starts to become about duty, which is an important part. As you said, the fact that they're fed, have clothes on like that, you get to the end of the day and you are proud of that. But it is, I love the subtlety of your answer that like, hey, there are, this doesn't need to be another thing you try to shove into a calendar that already needs less things in it. It actually could be the way in which you approach the interactions within that already busy calendar.
Yes. I heard a great story. I'll make it really quick. Rich Diviney talks about, he's a ex-Navy SEAL, former Navy SEAL, excuse me. And he has a book out called Master of Uncertainty and wrote a book of attributes versus skills. And one thing he said in there, Hell Week, they're all in the water, they're holding hands, the sun's going down. The guys are like, just come in, there's hot coffee and donuts, and you're, hand to hand with another guy. And he told the story of this one Navy SEAL who was like, and they're pushing these guys to come in, and like, oh, the second team's coming and they're going to really give it to you all night. And it's really stressful. And the one guy's like, well, if the donuts are not chocolate, like I'm not coming in. And sometimes it's like, we don't realize, things can be hard and we can still see the glimmer, the joy, the funniness, the irony, the craziness, whatever it is. And I feel like the more we can do that, the easier it makes all of it. Because how many times, how many dishes go in dishwashers and you wipe a counter down for the 50th time that day, and then you sweep up where they ate, and then it's okay laundry, and then work, and then calls, and all these things. But could we reframe it and sort of be a little more playful?
Well, and that's what I think you've done such a great job of, and Laird, throughout your career, is that I've heard you reference plenty of times like the seasons of life. And you actually said it when we kicked off today. And I think that's so powerful because instead of trying to control the season, it's like have the awareness and the wisdom to like be aware of the ecosystem you're playing in and then sink into it, as opposed to it's such a human thing, especially in the phase we're in now, to want to start to reach and control the elements of that ecosystem. Then you just drive yourself insane. It's like, no, accept and sink into it. And then I think that's where wisdom ends up emanating from, is you do that enough and you recognize like, oh, this too will pass. And then with enough of those passes, you stop trying to control and you kind of just sink into those different phases of life.
I have a confession. There have been moments, I have 3 daughters that at different times for different reasons, you're in a phase of a teenage daughter, right? And there are these moments. I don't know if a lot of people feel this way about Christmas. I have felt about this, like Thanksgiving hits and you go, man, if I can just get through to January 2nd, right? Like you want to power through the whole thing, the Santa Claus, just the insanity that are the holidays. And I have a kid who has a birthday on January 1st, right? So I used to think that, and I used to go, you can't do that. Or a teenager like, man, I can't wait for this phase to be over because, could we just jump ahead? And then you realize that if you do that, you miss it. And within it is what we need. It is the learning, is the experience, is the love, is the friction, is all of it. And so I would catch myself going, I just got to get through this. And it's like, no, be here because you don't know, how long or how many more times. And this will be only this way right now.
Yeah, I think that's such good perspective because you kind of hit on it, Tony. I think it's almost like we have a checklist and it's a check a box. Like for my daughter, it's like, I try to get her outside after work. Sometimes, we're on the beach there. And to me, it's like, all right, I want to get her in sunlight because that's a more like healthy activity and she can just explore and be grabbing rocks and digging in the sand and stuff. So for me, it's like, all right, check that box. Good dad, you did it. And then, okay, maybe we can paint when we get inside instead of turn the iPad on. Okay, win for dad because we did something artistic versus an electronic. But to me, those are almost like chores. So when we're out there, you're not enjoying it as much. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Is like, how much would you give in 20 years to be back out on the beach with your 4-year-old daughter and she's digging, holes in the sand, right? You'd give any amount of money because you're going to miss that. So we've had a couple of guests before that have had some pretty traumatic events happen in their life, and it gives them a different perspective when they get out of that event of like, the house is a mess and the kids are running around and you kind of just sit back and embrace it because you're like, all right, at a certain point, this house is going to be empty and it will be immaculate because only 2 people will probably live there and they'll be adults and you're going to miss that chaos. So I think it's a good lesson for all of us to live in that moment. Of course, it's super cliche. It's easier said than done. But I think we got to be a bit deliberate with it in those moments. Otherwise, it's just a cycle where you're just on autopilot.
Yeah. And I think even if like you're doing a startup business where it's like, man, it's a lot of work with not much return, but all the learning and growing. And then when the growth does happen, sometimes it's so meaningful. So I think you could use that reference for so many things. Somebody asked me once, what's one of my favorite feelings, or sounds, or, I said, when everyone's in the house and they're all tucked in, for me, that was just the best feeling in life. It's like we're all going to bed, everyone's good, they're in their beds. But I didn't realize until after I had children, when you hear, like you guys hear your children running from room to room in those little steps, room to room, coming your way. I think if people really paid attention, there's really not too many things better than that sound. And if we can just capture it in moments, it doesn't mean be precious and meaningful. That's not practical, but it just means take it in,
Love that.
How have you, when it really, with my third, and our third is only going on 5 months now, but it's been very cool to see the difference in personality that becomes obvious at a very young age. Now our oldest is going to be 3 in a month. Our second is 17 months. And even just the difference between those two, but then even to see the third, the difference there was just a really cool thing to observe. How have you navigated with 3 daughters and obviously a female yourself? How have you navigated the different personalities and the different dynamic that I'm sure each, and the lessons that each of those has brought to you throughout your time as a mother?
Certainly being my daughter's mother is the most humbling job I've ever had. It was interesting for me because my first daughter, again, is my stepdaughter. And so I was only her for 8 years. And there were parts of her that were really easy compared to my other two. And it's pretty funny. And in ways we didn't get on each other's nerves the way I could actually get on my nerves of my younger two. I think it could also be some kind of genetic link where it's just like built in. And just being with her, it was like learning about being another source of love. And then with my second, she's much more similar to Laird. So I had some insights to that. But I will say, we went through things with that particular daughter that I had seriously the most growth as a parent, which was this idea of, Byron Katie was the person that ended up helping me deal with some stuff with this particular daughter. And she said something to Laird and I one day, and I'm telling you as a parent, it was the realest thing. She goes, what the good news is? She's either going to choose to do it or she isn't. And she goes, and the bad news is she's either going to choose to do it or she isn't. And you start to realize that from like 0 to 13, 12, whatever the age is, you have this window that you're really on duty. And then it shifts into something else that takes a lot of growth from you as a person, which is a level of surrender and acceptance that you didn't know you were going to have to do and that you don't really want to. But you also know there's probably not a real alternative because you don't want to delay, right? Like I don't want to delay my girls going through their things. I want them to do it while they're home. So it wasn't about getting them to oblige us. And Laird and I are, we're not people, I don't think we conform very much. And they certainly have taken those traits on. And when you're raising strong people, it is really a pain in the ass as a parent. Because you could say, do it my way, this way. But I feel like then when they're 35 and they somehow are, alcoholic or nobody listened to their feelings or whatever, I'd rather go through it with them. So the expansion for me of the different personalities. And then my youngest daughter is very similar to myself. So I recognize so much of it. And I've even gotten to the place with that daughter, for example, she's on her game, whatever, school, doesn't really party that much, but she's very demanding and pretty brutal, non-compromising. I say to her, listen, I need to tell you, like, if you're not seeing or picking this up, life's going to teach you. And she's like, are you trying to scare me? I go, no, but I need you to consider yourself warned because I have to do my job, but I'm not going to beat this to death. So I think it's with each kid, there's a different strategy, but at the end, what that is, and you guys are so far from this stage, when they talk about surrendering your children, that is such a radical lesson for a parent.
And what age would you consider that? Is that like 14, 15, particularly when they can drive? Because then they can make, you're not going to see 80% of the decisions they make at that point.
And it's before that, right?
Okay.
But it's not, hey, you have the keys to the castle and you're like, you do whatever you want. But what you start to realize is they're going to make certain choices that maybe you don't want for them. And then you have to go back to thinking about, well, when I was a kid, how did I land on my beliefs and my own thoughts and my own feelings? By living a little. And so it's counterintuitive, but you want them to do it when they're at home because no one's going to look after them more than you. You don't want to do it when you send them off to college. Like, I want them all to be through it so that it's like, oh, I don't party or get blackout drunk, on alcohol because, first of all, what's the big deal, right? So it's this weird thing of like, you have to let them go to the edge so that ultimately they're actually safer and, kind of be aware, be in tune, be alert, where they are, what's going on. But like, I never tracked my girls or anything like that because my job is to teach you to control yourself, to manage yourself. It is not to control you. And it is very hard to do because the impulse is so strong. And especially because they handed you the most precious little baby that yet you have to realize that is not who this is anymore. And so the education is really pretty far out.
Yeah, I think there's probably a spectrum where, there's cases of, buddies of mine that their parents were, trying to raise them as this perfect child. And then they got into like, junior, senior high school and they just went nuts. And then particularly college because it's like you tried to, make them perfect. And then obviously if you go too far the other way, where like you're the parent that like is letting a bunch of 15-year-olds get hammered in the basement and everyone kind of knows those are the parents that are cool with it. I don't think that's probably the way, but I think you're right. I think it's probably somewhere where you got to let them get to that line and see it. Otherwise, they're going to get to college and just go nuts. And that's where, they get straight Fs the first semester because they drink every night. And you hear this story all the time. So, you can't find that happy medium. But I think at least recognizing that you can't control everything. You just got to try to arm them with the lessons and then like, all right, they're going to screw some shit up for sure, but better learning when they're 16 than 18 when they're in college by themselves and just, drinking Everclear for the first time at a frat party.
Been there.
A couple times.
How about this idea too? You guys are the kind of dads that you can do like kind of rad shit with your kids and do kind of safe, scary things. So a couple things that we've learned over the years is let your kids be understand how to do. I always tell my girls, if you're smart, you can do really dangerous things. If you're dumb, you won't get to. And so what you do is you create these opportunities even when they're little. My daughter, who's now 21, drove jet skis with Laird alone when she was 3.5 years old, no problem, hauling ass everywhere, because it's like, oh yeah, I get to get my yee-yaws out. I get to be dangerous, but it's still within a reasonable and safe place. And then the more you teach them, the more they understand, oh, this is dangerous, so I have to take it serious. It's sort of like the parent that always picks up the kid before the wave grabs them. It's like, no, you might want to let them get hit by the wave so they understand what the consequence is. So I think there's another thing of giving them some rein to really kind of do some cool, wild things safely and understand. And it's being a good example. If you and your partner are modeling the things that you really hope for your children, and then they'll do their own version of it, we don't give that enough credit.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it doesn't show up on the stat book right away. So it's hard to hold in perspective just how much that influences down the road. But when you really start to unpack the subtlety of, or like the dynamic nature of the psyche and what builds those building blocks that allows for an integrated, healthy person, it certainly doesn't get the credit it deserves.
Yeah, and I don't think you realize it until you're for me, it was like in my 20s, probably early to mid 20s. I finally realized like, oh, watching my parents do that, and that is critical to how I see things now, and in a really positive way. You know what I mean? Making sure we have family dinners and making breakfast in the morning. And, my dad would like go mow the neighbor's lawn because he's, was just trying to help out the lady because she was older, and he would just do it. You know what I mean? Before I even woken up, he's mowed 2 lawns, and like the things that when you're 12, you're like, oh, that's just okay. You don't really put much stock in it. But then when you're 25, like, man, my dad getting up at 6:30 to go mow the neighbor's lawn for free. Like that was a pretty stand up thing to do, you know, so it comes full circle and, you know.
Well, that's the other fun thing about parenting. It's a little bit longevity. The arc on the story is so long. I joke that with my youngest daughter right now, we're like in the experiment, of course, you know, and I always say like either I'm a genius or this is gonna, you know, we'll find out in another 5 years, like how this is going to go. Right. And so there's this weird thing of sitting in that discomfort and just being like, okay. And I wake up and we're going to keep, you know, we'll give it 100% today, but really having it in your house and being the things that really you believe in. I don't know of a more powerful way, and by playing by the rules. What I mean by that is I don't manipulate my children to the best of my ability. I really play by the rules. I don't use guilt trips. I don't say one thing and mean another. I'm very direct, and I try really hard to play by the rules so they see what that looks like. So it's like fight fair, you know, don't use guilt, all these things that you'll see they take it on.
Gabby, you've been very open about kind of the struggles you and Laird went through at the initial stages of your relationship. But to observe your journey from afar and to see you two converse about that and with humor built into it is an incredible thing to see. And what were the big catalysts for you guys you've been together, what is it, 25 years?
We've been together this year. We'll be together 30 years, married 28 years. Yeah.
Wow. So what have been the big catalyst for you two kind of maintaining the relationship or you've built? And what are some foundational principles that you think apply across the board, regardless of where you're at in your current relationship?
You know, I think both Laird and I grew up on islands. I grew up in the Caribbean and he grew up on Kauai. And I think they look at the outside and they sort of draw some obvious conclusions as to why, you know, we were originally together. I think our values are really, really similar. So our philosophy around, you know, lifestyle and money and God and how you treat people and also the shared idea that each individual person is in charge of their own happiness. I think both Laird and I operate that way pretty seriously. So it's this weird mixture of there is a pretty intense selfishness of each of us, but somehow that allows us actually to really come together and give to the relationship and to the family. So it's like really knowing, hey, I'm not going to be my best if I don't, for Laird, go surf and do my thing, or for me to train or what have you. And neither one of us is waiting on the other one to do it. So, for example, I'm not going to wait for Laird to do X, Y, and Z to be nice or loving or any of these things. It's like, hey, I'm going to, conversely on that, you take care of your side. I'm going to show up. I'm going to do the best I can. I always say I don't treat anyone better than I treat Laird. And I see Laird year after year showing up and doing his best version of that as well, because you can't force each other. Right? And you can't say, well, when you do this, I'm going to do that. I don't think for us, that doesn't work. The other thing we have built into our dynamic is I think both of us are still interested in learning, and I don't think we get tied too much to the back. So even though maybe you do certain things in your life, you wear certain coats of identity, I think both of us shed those pretty quickly and we keep moving forward and we're interested in new things. So I think we get to bring that to the dynamic. And then the other side of this is there's a couple things. When you've been together long enough with somebody and you've learned some stuff, you start to appreciate the fact that you can find a partner that you can grow with, that you can learn with. So you actually start to, I think, appreciate the relationship even more as time goes on. And then a lot of the things Laird has taught me. I'm not the courageous one. I'm the more scared one for sure. Laird is perfectly willing to put his heart on the chopping block, which is like pull the weeds right away. We don't let things build up. In the first day, even if it's somebody's tired, it's like, hey, what's up? And so it's really, you know, not brushing things under the carpet. Conversely, not letting things be a big deal. Like if Laird is stressed out or something's in the middle of something and he snaps at me to give him something, I generally probably don't take that personal because I'll be like, yeah, he's, under a 200-pound whatever, and he needs the wrench or something, right? So it's moving in and out about what needs to get addressed, what is not a big deal. And then finally, I think there is a deep mutual respect and enough reverence that we kind of don't mess with each other. And that's built in. I think both of us have that. And so we don't lead with that, but I think it's understood that, I would like it if you talk to me respectfully. It would be great,
And you use the analogy of you two both being able to kind of shed your coats. I think just on the last episode, I use an often analogy of like, you sit in a room of shelves that you take your mask. You should have the ability to take your mask on and off and set them on the shelf and then say, hey, if I need to access that, I can put it on. But I think there's extreme danger when you get addicted to a certain mask and then you forget how to take it off and you start to identify as that mask. So was that an innate thing that you both were able to do, or what tools allowed you to be able to view it that way of like, hey, the Gabby as an athlete, the Gabby of these things, yes, you still are those things, but don't let me get addicted to it, because then that's where you're not shifting with the seasonality of life.
It's funny, even Laird, I don't know an athlete that's dedicated more years to a sport than Laird. And Laird will say, I'm Laird. I'm not a surfer. One of the things I do is surf. And I think I saw early in my life that you could get so intertwined with like, oh, you're that basketball player, you're that volleyball player, you're that military. It felt like a death. Like it felt like the thing that was so magical to me was going to be the thing that tortured me. And so really early on, I sort of said, what are all the things you're interested in? And try to keep them going. You may not be able to spend as much time in them, especially when you're pursuing a professional sport, but like dabble and dibble so that your world not only doesn't get so small, but this mask or this identity. So I think both Laird and I, I don't think it was that hard for us. And Laird says there's a some military quote where the guy said, never let your memories be greater than your dreams. And I think that feels right to me. Like it feels like, hey, keep looking ahead, keep dreaming, extending yourself, growing. And it's great. Like I loved all that stuff. And sometimes it's bittersweet. You go, I'm never going to jump around like that again or be that good at volleyball again. But wow, how lucky was I that I got to do that. And just, keep adding value, because that's really what it is. What we want is, how do I fit into the tribe? What value do I bring? And so that's why we're associating it with that. But if we have new things that we can contribute and share and help the tribe, whatever tribe you're in, I think that really is helpful.
I love that. Don't let your memories be greater than your dreams. I mean, if you think about that, think of how many people peak early, right? And then they're talking about the glory days. And if we can just take that mentality of, particularly, I would say for like highly accomplished individuals, like that could have been you after your professional career. You could be like, all right, great run. Now I'm just going to go be a parent. And like, that would be a totally fine and honorable thing. But you clearly had other things that were on your list that you wanted to accomplish, and you've done plenty of those things. So I love that mentality, because I think some people, to your all's point, get too caught up in the identity of that one thing. And then once that gig is up, there's no, all right, what's next? Because and I see that with a lot of my, unfortunately, with a lot of my military teammates, they're so invested in the job, and it's because they're reliable guys and they're good dudes, but there's not a lot of balance outside of that. And then when the 20 years is up, or the 10 years or the 30, whatever they do, it's a difficult transition because they don't have those other components in place. And I fear that a lot of people, that is the pinnacle, because it's like, how do you top that? But I think if you have the mindset, all right, what's next? Then you'll invent whatever that is.
Well, and so there's a couple parts of that I think are really powerful that you said, which is, that's why it's really important to build a real life. And it's hard to do when you're in pursuit of something on an extreme level. It's hard to build because that takes energy, right? But when you build real relationships, a real life, that also tethers you to something that it might be changing, but it doesn't change. Like all of a sudden your friends go, hey, I don't love you anymore because you're not serving. It's like, they love you. And just having a few of those people that, you can do it. And then the other side of that is the world is telling us every day, money, success, these titles, this is what's going to make you happy. And I believe if we can also really ask ourselves individually the real question of what is going to make me feel satisfied, we'd be surprised how much we would get out of things that maybe are more quiet, or people aren't like, wow, you got that new job, or, because we really celebrate the loud things. And I understand it, professional sports, because they're sexy. It's a sharp end of the stick. It's all this stuff. But there's so many things in our life that I think feed us and make us feel good and make us feel still, that if we took the time to ask ourselves and had the courage to say, I'm going to pursue that, even if the world isn't going to be like, good job, I think there's a lot of power in that.
Yeah, we've forgotten the power of quiet, of stillness. And it's what, like, for my wife and I, like, we have a huge garden project right now, and we're laughing because everyone's like, well, what are you going to grow? And we looked at each other. We're like, we don't even care. We don't even care if we build the garden and then the damn thing. And trust me, I have to catch myself. I'm researching like what can grow at this time and what's the soil depth. And then it's like, it's actually just the act of doing something that doesn't have an outcome. Now, hopefully we will be able to grow some strawberries and carrots and lettuce, but it's the act of that. And that's why people like Paul Chek have had such a hard influence, or a positive influence over kind of the way I at least attempt to construct my day, is because he has always been speaking on the fact of like, Dr. Quiet needs to be in there. And if you don't integrate it, like, it's going to show up as disease at some point in your life. So how have you maintained, or like what practices, I guess, or tools do you use to have a ritual around stillness?
I think for me, it's more of an active thing. And when I say that, it's just something I weave in. What I've learned about life, meditation, decompression, de-stressing, whatever. These are things that they're gaps. So you put them in. Oh, here's a gap, I only schedule my workouts because that's the only way those happen. But so my point is that sometimes you're walking from A to B, and I just find the way to just check in with myself. It doesn't have to be monumental. I don't have to have an incense burning and the sun is rising or setting. It's like, oh, here's a moment. I hear the birds, checking in with myself. I'm just sort of appreciating living, and now I'm going into this whatever next thing I'm doing. And so I'm always finding ways to downregulate in those quiet moments. And then as far as a physical practice, my training really works for me in the way of keeping me always in this place more often, because I exert energy where I can just be calmer all day long and have, more time to respond how I want to, more times than not. And then finally, I say no a lot. I don't do a lot of extra. It's like, we go to bed early, we have family dinner. I'm not running all over the place doing stuff, because I think that ends up hurting me more than anything.
That's so good. That's a nugget of gold right there, because it's death by 1,000 cuts. If you say yes to everyone and every commitment, before you know it, you're just too task saturated, and you never have any chance of having that quiet time. So I think that's particularly, for somebody like you, I'm sure you get a lot of people that would love to have access to you and your time and your presence, and hey, come on this and do this. And I think you have to have a lot of discipline, the more reachable you are to do that. So I think for the people listening, bookmark that one, because that's important.
Yeah. And by the way, just really quick, there could be somebody who says, hey, it's a college student who's like, can I interview you? And I think to myself, this person is on the hustle and they've got the, courage to reach out. I will do stuff like that, because I think, we need to put energy into those kinds of things. But what you learn is you can say to people, cool, if you want to hang out, come work out with me. Like, I'm not going out to dinner. Like, it's just not going to happen. So unless you want to come to my house for an early family dinner, I'll cook for you. No problem. So I think it's also fitting in the ways that feel authentic to you.
Gabby, who would you put on your Mount Rushmore of mentors, coaches, teachers, just throughout your life? Who have been some people that have contributed in a way that have truly shaped who you are?
One thing I always say is that I had a lot of peripheral adults step into my life very early in my life. Starting at 2 years old, I lived with a couple, my aunt and Uncle Joe. They were childhood friends of my mother, neighborhood friends in Long Island, and they raised me for 5 years. So I put them there. I was a very precocious kid. The only reason I know this is because I have a kid very similar to me. So I thought, oh my God, this is only a kid a mother could love. And somehow they loved me like their own kid. And I know I was probably a pretty good grand pain in the ass, but I would put them there. Just this idea of just people who, they took me in, they loved me. And that really helped me at a time that I desperately needed it. I would say I had a principal in high school, my junior and senior year, Mr. Greener, Tim Greener, who actually I lived with him and his wife and 2 small children my senior year because my mother was not coming back to the school, and he knew that I needed that, sort of line and stability. And that is actually how I ended up going to college on a scholarship, because I went to that school. And then in college, and I had a basketball coach that was very monumental in high school, but my college coach, Cecile Renaud, was certainly in a different way one of the most impactful people in my life, because I was on my own and I went to college at 17, and then I got an offer to start modeling. And most coaches would have said, hey, you got to choose. And this is back in the day before NIL. So you're on scholarship, like that's gold. And she's like, hey, let's figure this out so you can do both, because she understood that I was navigating my life and paying for myself. And I actually ended up giving up my scholarship after my second year, and I paid to play because it just made sense. But she really taught me about juggling a lot of things at one time, being personally accountable. She was all about accountability. But one thing about her, she was always prepared as a coach, always fair, and she was the thing that she was talking about. So that bled over into how I coach, how I live, and some of my skill sets. So I think that those certainly have been people that I still have a relationship with, and they help me. And then finally, quite frankly, I mean, Laird has had a huge impact. We are very different, and Laird leads with his heart, and I lead with my head. I joke that I'm the person who can be like, oh, I think I'm getting angry, and Laird has been such an incredible example of just, here it is. And I'm like, whoa. And he always is, listen, I never have to worry about wondering what I said, because I tell the truth. And sometimes he's really direct with people, and it almost seems harsh, but he reminds me, he's like, no, Gabby, this is being loving. Shielding people or protecting them or not having that one conversation, that's actually not being loving. Being loving is, thoughtfully being direct. And so that has really influenced me and how I've evolved as an adult, which is you can house kind of a lot of different things, and you don't have to be hysterical to finally say what you think and feel. That sometimes to be in charge of situations, you have to say uncomfortable things. It's not always going to be popular, and it's really been helpful.
And from a female optic, you watched obviously Laird go through now 25 years of being a father, and as two new fathers, Bear and I. Any advice from the female optic you would give to us at the stage we're at of like, hey, here's some things I watched Laird wrestle with and then better embody as he got older? Any principles there that you would be willing to share?
Well, especially girl dads too. Like,
yeah,
that's
exactly.
a whole nother spin on this.
Yeah.
It's funny because my middle daughter aligns the most with Laird, where it was like, let's go, and I'll give you an example. My youngest daughter there's a sort of a fickleness. And here's one thing to remind all dads: when girls start to develop puberty, they will by nature, most of them, take a natural space. Why? Think about this. You're developing breasts. You want to hug your dad? Right? So so dads go like, oh, what's wrong? It's like, no, this is all really natural and okay. And she's not going away. She'll be right back. it's just something as they're navigating that is tricky. I think sometimes dads have a tendency to come in and swoop in with a blade and be like, just do this, and or da da da, get that. And I often joke that I don't see daughters reacting well to that, but there's something actually good about them going through it, because sometimes in life is how it is. So it does teach the girl to be kind of more malleable. And another thing is, when dads don't realize it, and everybody talks about it, daddy issues. It's like, if you are loving, I believe if a father is truly loving to their daughter, the amount of power that it gives them and security and strength, a dad can't possibly realize. I've seen it show up 3 different times in 3 different daughters, and it is real. Like, these girls will know how to take care of themselves. They pick very, they're around boys that are, really solid, and we're not telling them. You can't tell them what to do. So I think it's allowing them to drift off. And in that time, Laird has said, he talks about the post of the house. He goes, you sometimes as a dad, especially to daughters, you're like that post, and they come up and they go, oh, it's solid. Okay, I'm off. And then sometimes they come back and they go, oh, it's still there. And I think it feels thankless as a dad. And I think sometimes dads feel out of the loop, but it's such a powerful tool for a dad to know that sometimes that's really what they need. Yeah, but it's every daughter is different, and dad's showing up pretty great, but really also what the dad does is, how does he treat his wife or his girlfriend or his partner? That is a huge thing for any of the kids.
Yeah, we've said before, more is caught than taught, right? So you got to be the example, and I love that analogy you used about the post. I've kind of used a shoreline analogy, right? Like, you got to let them venture into open ocean, but the shoreline is always there, and they know they can come back, and that's their hard point. So, obviously I'm just getting started. I'm not the shoreline yet, but I know someday, she's gonna have to venture off on her own, and at that point, all right, the hay's in the barn. You just hope you've instilled enough lessons that they make good decisions, and if shit hits the fan, you come back to mom and dad, and we're here to help you navigate it. But we're a ways away from that, Tony. But it's good lessons that we need to be heeding here.
One time I think I was out by garbage cans, either crying quietly because I was frustrated about something, and Laird said 2 things to me that really stuck with me. He said, I was like, I don't know, because I sometimes you have parental insecurity. It's like, did I screw this whole thing up? And he's like, you're here and you love them. And I thought, that's sometimes you need it down to that. And I remember another time we were going through something with one of our girls. She was probably 19, and it was something kind of hairy. And he goes, oh my God, just survive to 25. And I thought, because sometimes we put like, oh, if they did, and the way she says it, and this, it's like, you know what, just live. We'll work it out.
Love that. That simplifies it greatly. I like that.
Well, Gabby, I know we centered more around the family side, which I love to hear your perspective. I think it's such a healthy perspective on what that can look like after doing it for 2.5 decades. But I want to give you the opportunity. What are you working on now? Anything you want to plug from a business side of things that you want to make listeners aware of?
Oh, that's super kind. I think for me, I'm just in the space like so many others where it's like, how do we make it an invitation and achievable for people to figure out ways to care for themselves? But, we've overcomplicated it. I think there's so much information out there, which is great. Like, for me personally, I love that sharp end of the stick consumption. But I think for most people that barely have 5 minutes to really think about it, it's like, how do we make that easy for them? I actually just did a really interesting shoot with Dr. Gabrielle Lyon and Stacy Sims. So what I'm trying to do now is, and 2 other incredible women, is create these sort of collectives. It is a collective, and sort of say, okay, that's a science backing, because some people need the data. Some people go, okay, how would you apply that in real life? Okay, what does that look like at 30? What does that look like at 50? So I'm really just pouring my energy more into that. And of course, we have Laird Superfood and XPT and my own training and things like that. So I don't know. I think it's not that I don't think about age, because you can't help it. You know, you brush your teeth every day and you go, oh, who is that? But I think staying curious and staying open is really, really a great tool, because new things, new adventures, new ideas, they come to you if you're doing that, and remembering, like, I'm first just a person. Then in this trip, I'm a female. I also am Laird's wife, and I am a mom. But just, tapping into the essence of who we are each day, because I think that's a really great guiding force. And I've also found that feeling good overall makes me be able to house all of that so much easier. We live in a time that's I think people need to be stronger and move slower and be more tolerant. And when people have this idea of tough or being a badass, it's like, I don't think they understand that that's actually really connected to being, the most loving, the most tolerant, and but also not being a victim or a crybaby about things. So it's like, how do we sort of get as many of us where it's, we're showing, it's like, show up, lift up your neighbor, be there for your family, take care of yourself. And, there's so many lessons ahead. Might as well embrace them.
Love it. Gabby, I got one more question for you to close it out. You've accomplished a lot. You've worn many hats over the years. What is your biggest regret when you look back on everything? Hitting you with a curveball to close it out.
I mean, honestly, I wish I had stretched more and done gymnastics so that I was closer to the ground. And I'm guaranteeing I'll have some parental regret, because that seems to be built in. So I don't know what that one is yet, but I just wish I had done a practice closer to the ground and I didn't worry so much. This whole past futuring or living it, in the future is such a colossal waste of energy and time. And so I would invite anyone, if they can minimize that somehow, it's worth it.
That's a good one. I mean, I think a lot of that can be achieved. I'm working on it more now, but meditation, it's like, you think about what worrying actually is. It's like you're literally getting spun up over something that 95% of the time isn't even going to happen. You're literally you're fearing a fictitious future outcome. You know what I mean? So like, it's like, just let it happen. Usually the hype or the buildup is worse than the actual event anyway. So I think most of us battle with that for sure. And if there's a way to hack that, I wish there was. But I think it just comes from going deep on your own insights and realizing that the actual fear is worse than the outcome in most cases. So,
yeah, I think I also, actually, adding to that, I would have played an instrument.
Right on.
Well, Gabby, the last thing I want to close on, and she's going to kick me for this, is that I asked you the question surrounding who's on your Mount Rushmore. I want to say that you were on the Mount Rushmore of my wife. So I want to thank you for that. Like, when she found out you were coming on, I have seen her excited like that, of course, but never when talking about the podcast. So I want to give you a shout out for that, because I know she's one of thousands that have been positively influenced by your body of work over the last, however many decades it is. So thank you for that. And I said she'll kick me, but I think she'll also appreciate that I was willing to share that with you.
Well, dude, she could have taken my seat. Yeah. She could have been co-host for this episode.
I commend her, because I joked on the side of my face, Laird and I could not have handled 3 kids under 3. We're both too intense. Who's going to be the agreeable one? We spaced our kids out. So kudos to her. And, I've learned something that makes it easier, I think. We're all sort of just the portal, right? Like, we're here to sort of hold space. And I think if you get an assignment, like right now, you guys have your assignment, and you get to represent whatever these things are, just be a good steward, right? And so the fact that I got to play sports and do these things, I'm just trying to be a good steward. take care of that opportunity of being that portal. And then when I'm invited or asked to go somewhere else to the next, I will. So I think sometimes we think, oh, it's me, or it's like, nah, it isn't. You're being a steward of something and take care of it.
When I think her favorite quote, and I actually wrote it down because I think you and Laird both embody this, and I'll close on it, is that, and it encompasses what you just said, is I would love to live like a river flows, carried by the surprise of its own unfolding. Like, what a beautiful way to encompass the fact that, like, what you just said is that you view life almost as something that's unfolding rather than you in any way are dictating or controlling it. Because I think when you actually get an awareness of how we had 3 kids under 3, how these things have unfolded, there's this magical essence that sits kind of underneath that. And the more attuned you get to it, the more you're able to ride along with it rather than trying to dictate where it flows. And then you can just enjoy truly the unfolding of it as opposed to trying to create the unfolding.
That's right. But dream and manifest for sure.
Of course. Of course.
Well, perfect. Well, Gabby, thank you so much. Had a lot of fun in this conversation. I love the fact that we focused a lot on family. It's like, especially with you, with your bio, like we could have went in a way different direction. And I think we just gravitated towards that. Obviously, it's super important for Tony and I. Of course, it is for you. So really appreciate your time in being open and vulnerable to us with some of these things, and wish you the best.
Thank you. Aloha.